Hi everybody, welcome back. This is Joe the Wigit Wilson, and I am the author of Emperor of Continia, Book 1 of the Draman Saga. We are reading it, and we are going to be doing Chapter 8 today. This chapter is right after the big setup of Chapter 7, and starts going into a little bit more detail, and is actually my son's favorite chapter of the book, so I'm going to try to do it justice for him. Let's get right into Chapter 8. The next morning, I awoke alone in the great fluffy bed. Valaris had left that night, it seemed. Wigit came barging into the room. "Morning, John! The sun is just rising over the eastern horizon. It's a great day to start a great adventure," he said, loud enough to wake the dead. "Morning, Wigit," I said, chuckling. I was brimming over with excitement and happiness. "Why the cheerful mood?" "I was expecting you to be the one cheerful this morning, lover boy," Wigit said with a laugh and pinched me on my cheek. "Besides, a good mission always puts me in a great mood." He continued to laugh. "How did you know about that?" I said, upset and confused. "Did I miss something?" "The whole kingdom knows about what happened last night, my dear boy. It's no light matter when an elf princess chooses her mate, especially when it's someone like you. Now get up. We leave an hour after the ceremony, of course," Wigit said, heading for the door. "What ceremony?" I yelled. A little too late. Wigit had already left, singing a merry tune as he strode down the stone hall. I got up rather slowly, made my way into the warm tub of water, and soaked for a good 10 minutes. I was very sore after the previous day's adventures and last night's magic. I got out of the tub, noticing that my robe had been cleaned and pressed and was laying neatly on the chair with a single flower resting on top of it. It was a very pretty flower. It looked like a rose, but deep white with much bigger petals. I brought it to my nose and inhaled. The scent flooded my head with memories of Valaris. It smelled just like her. I dressed and took the flower downstairs with me. As I entered the main hall, I was greeted with all kinds of people wearing their finest armor and robes. Wigit came to me and put a hand on my shoulder. "What took you so long? If I were you, I wouldn't keep such a fine young elf waiting. They tend to get a little moody," Wigit said with a chuckle, giving me a light punch on the chest. "What is going on here, Wigit? And, what is this flower called?" I said, and lifted up the flower to him. "Oh, the king left that in your room last night. It's a very rare flower indeed. It's called a love scent. It gives off the scent of your true love. As for what's going on here, you're about to find out," Wigit said, leading me by the arm out into the middle of the great hall. At the end of the hall, before the king's throne, was Valaris, dressed in the most beautiful white robe. On her knees and facing the king, who was standing, Wigit led me over to Valaris and gently pushed on my shoulder. I got the hint, and got down on both knees next to Valaris and faced the king. The king looked at both of us and gave a big smile. "We are gathered here under testimony of the union of these two fine people under the elven law." At those words, I turned to Valaris and mouthed the word union in a questioning manner. She gave me a sweet smile and nodded. The king continued. "As per elven law, Valaris has chosen her life mate, John Maddington. Do you deny, Valaris?" I turned and took one look into her eyes and knew that what the king was saying was true. The strange thing was the fact that I very much liked the idea. "No, I do not deny Valaris, Your Majesty." The king turned to Valaris. "Do you, Valaris, deny John Maddington?" "No, Your Majesty, I do not." "Then as witness to this moment, we recognize you two bound as life partners." The king looked at us with a big smile. "Valaris, your father would be proud, as I am proud. You have chosen a fine young man indeed. Many great things will come of this. I give you both my kingdom's blessing. One last item remains of the ceremony, John. Do you still have the flower that was placed on your robe?" "Yes, Your Majesty." I took the flower out of my robe pocket and showed him. Valaris gently grabbed my hand that was holding the rose. "You shall now both take in the deep scent of your true love from that flower." We both leaned into the flower and took a deep breath. Oh, what a scent that followed. Everything that had happened between Valaris and me came back crystal clear in a flood, like it was happening all over again, very, very fast. When I came back to reality, I noticed that Valaris and I were each holding a flower. Again, the king gave us a huge smile. "The flower has reproduced. You are truly meant to be. With this, I give you a gift, John. Please rise." Everyone in the chamber began to cheer and clap loudly. When I stood up, A high knight from the king's army stepped forward and handed the king a long object hidden in a cheesecloth. After unwrapping it, the king held out the most brilliant straight-edged katana I had ever seen. Its handle was made of pure gold, crested with sapphires and gleaming in the morning light. The sheath also was made of gold and studded with diamonds all along its base. The king handed me the blade. This blade belonged to the last great king of the Morganaris people. It now belongs to you, John. Take it, and wield it with pride and precision. I unsheathed the mighty sword to see that the blade was not made from your typical metal. In fact, it was not made from metal at all. The blade was long and sharp diamond. It gleamed as bright as a star. I sheathed the blade and bowed to the king. I am not worthy of such a gift, your majesty. Call it a union gift, then, the king said, still smiling. May it prove useful on your journey. It is time for the 4 travelers to leave. The sun is becoming full in the morning sky. Until we meet again, John, the king said with a wink. Rogart came forward and bowed to the king with a tired and grumpy-looking Verdenaris poking his little head out of the pack. I'll protect them with my life, your majesty. Let's hope it does not come to that, Rogart, Lord of the North Castle, the king said. Valaris and I went up to the room in the castle and got ready for the long journey ahead. The 4 of us said our final farewells and walked out of the keep towards the South Castle. Why are we going towards the South Castle, Rogart? Asked Valaris, concern in her eyes. Oh, no big reason. Really. We'll be taking the West Castle to our exit, once we have had our good luck drink at the Whispering Mist Tavern, Rogart said with a chuckle. Finally, something good for a change, Werner said, again poking his head out of the pack, and as always looked grumpy. I could use a good Wergen ale before we walk for pointless hours. We would use your teleport, Verdenaris. It wasn't for the fact that we don't know where we'd wind up, Rogart said, chuckling. Besides, a good adventure never hurt anyone. Well, maybe a few travelers here and there, but, that met their demise on the road, but we shouldn't. Hopefully. Verdenaris reached out with his staff and gave a sharp rap to Rogart's head. Fortunately for Verdenaris, Rogart didn't even seem to notice. The streets were just starting to liven up a bit as the sun rose over the horizon. People were stumbling out of the inns and taverns on their way home after a long night of drinking and singing. Shopkeepers were setting up shop and cleaning. Many of them bowed as we passed. Merchants were setting up their stands of fruits and vegetables all along the side of the road, preparing for a long day of bartering and trading. Finally, we came to a tavern with a sign hanging in front. The words Whispering Mist carved into the wood. Inside smelled heavily of strong alcohol and roasting meat. Long wooden tables were set up in rows in the center of the tavern with smaller round tables along the sides, some hidden in the shadows. There were only 2 other people in the tavern this time of day. One was drunk, passed out, and sprawled over a table near the back, and of course the barkeep, who was wiping down the tables. The barkeep walked over to us as we sat down at one of the tables close to the entrance. When he recognized Rogart's armor, he stopped dead and gave a low bow. What can I get for you and your honored guest, my lord? The barkeep then looked at me and noticed my robes and the sword that was buckled to the left hip, and gave a startled glance. Or should I ask if you are the guest, my lord? Rogart looked at the barkeep. They are my guests. 4 of the finest ales you got, good sir. It's for good luck on a journey and also to celebrate a union. Well, right away, my lord. The finest in all of Wergen you shall have, said the plump barkeep as he headed down a flight of stairs behind the bar counter and fetched 4 of the finest mugs he had. After a few minutes, he came back to the table carrying 4 freshly cleaned pints brimming with a very strong-smelling drink. Rogart handed him 3 gold coins. The extra 2 are for your hospitality. The barkeep bowed as low as he could over his huge belly. Thank you, my lord. He bustled off and continued to clean his tavern with gusto, not once looking in our direction. Rogart picked up his pint and held it up. To our success, and to your union, he said, then guzzled down the whole pint down in seconds. I drank a few swallows. The stuff was strong. I almost could not keep it down. It tasted like someone had crushed wild onions then added pure alcohol. It was enough to make your stomach crawl into a hole, whimpering for mercy. Verdenaris was standing on the table with both hands on the brim of the large mug and his head all the way down into it, guzzling for all he was worth. It was a very funny sight to see, considering the mug came up to his chest. Valaris was sipping hers much like I was sipping mine. We made eye contact and gave a small laugh. Don't like ale much, do ya? Rogart said, looking at us with a foamy mustache. That did it. Valaris and I broke out in laughter. When we turned and looked at Verdenaris and saw his little feet sticking out the top of the mug, we almost fell out of our chairs laughing. Even Rogart had a good laugh after he noticed Verdenaris. When we were finished, Rogart pulled Verdenaris out of the mug by his feet, only to discover that the little magistrate had passed out and was snoring loudly. Rogart stuffed Verd into his pack as we headed out of the tavern into the fresh morning air. We headed back north, and then turned west along a wide merchant road towards the West Castle. When we arrived, the knight, in the same armor as Rogart, came out to greet us. Rogart shook his arm. I presume you four are ready to go. You did stop by the Whispering Mist, did you not? The man said with a smile. We did, Ashen. Yeah, we are ready to leave now. Is our transport ready? Rogart asked. Everything is ready. Come this way. The man called Ashen led us through the castle grounds where a large force of men was gathered. We're going to try and slow them down a little bit with a few traps. Very good, Ashen. If anyone could do that effectively, it would be you. If you would, please speak no more of this, Rogart said, looking at the men. The men bowed as we passed. When we left the castle through the drawbridge, on the other side, a strange man greeted us. The man was short for his kind, around 6 feet and 7 inches tall. He had one glass eye that had no color or pupil. He was a very strange man, to say the least. Right this way, my lord, he said, leading us to the boat at a nearby dock. A war mount gave a loud noise that sounded like a strangled elephant as its master hooked it up to the crank harness. The boat had no sails, rope, or paddles. All it had at its bow was a small wooden box with a crank arm sticking out. We got in and had a seat as the man with the glass eye sat in front of the crank arm. Ready, my lord? The man asked Rogart. Yeah. Begin, please. Rogart looked at my expression of wonder. There is never any wind on the lake, so we are forced to use some other means to travel across it. The man began turning the arm as fast as he could, and the boat lunged forward. Then it dawned on me what he was doing. That must be a manual version of a motorboat engine with a manual crank instead of a gas power. It was very interesting. The trip was not very long. We were traveling at a comfortable pace without much event along the way. Valaris and I held hands throughout the boat ride, looking at the different boats and activities along the lake. It looked as if the resources of the Worgen came from the lake. Fishermen were casting their nets or fishing lines over the side of their boats. And at one side of the lake, there looked to be an underwater stone quarry. There was a giant wrench attached to 4 different wooden platforms on either leg, with a boat docked in between them, directly underneath the center of the wrench. Men were diving down into the water, with picks attached to their backs and small bladders full of air and a mouthpiece strapped to their sides. Every now and then I saw the winch pull up a large white stone and place it on a boat. It looked like this was where they got this mist marble that the keep was made from. Shortly after we passed the quarry, we arrived at the west dock. Rogart stepped out first and offered us a hand out of the boat that was a little shorter than the dock. Vertnaris poked his head out of the little perch and motioned to the west. We need to hurry. Home far away. Only 4 days to go. I gotta beat up what's his name, Vertnaris said, slumping back down into the pack and mumbling under his breath. Rogart shrugged. Drunk magistrates are a pain in the butt sometimes, but funny nonetheless. He is right, though. We only have 4 days to get him to his home and fight it out with, what's his name. We are going to travel through the Righorn Valley, just passing the tip of Morganaris Wood's southern border. Wouldn't it be faster to just travel southwest through the plains than to take an extra day needed to go through the valley? Valaris said, looking at Rogart with suspicion. I would very much like for my mate to meet my father. Something we do not want to encounter at the moment is dead in the center of the plains, blocking our route. So yeah, it would be best to take the extra day and go around. Besides, there are more provisions through the valley than across the plains, Rogart said and strapped his sword into place. Trust me, young lady. It is best for you just to follow me and do not question why. It'll be safer for you and your John to follow. Your father will just have to wait. It seemed that they didn't call it marriage here, but instead consider us as bound. I liked their way of doing things a lot better than the way things were done at home. Besides, how often did a guy get to hook up with a very hot elf princess and get blessed by a king at the same time? As far as I knew, not very often. We began walking west with the sun still rising at our backs. The morning was cold enough to freeze our breath as we walked. The only good thing was the fact that the sky was clear. I had not seen that in days. Something odd occurred to me at that moment. Val, what is the deal with the weather in this land? It seems to only snow or rain in certain places. Why is that? Or was it just pure coincidence? She looked at me and smiled. Isn't it that way where you come from? It gets colder as you go north and hotter as you go south. Nope, afraid not. It's kind of by season where I come from. It rains for 2 months out of the year, then snows about 3 months in some places. That's funny. No, it only snows in the far north year-round. It only rains in 2 places, northeast and northwest. Oregon is kind of at the southern tip of the northern country, so it doesn't really rain. So how does the rest of the land get water? The rain provides water for the other lands by streams and rivers, of course. Every river and stream flows from north to south. Isn't that the way it always is? She asked, looking confused. Not where I come from, it isn't. The rivers and streams flow downhill, whichever direction that may be. Well, north is high and south is low. That's why the north has snow and the south is desert. Not much water reaches down far south. So I think it's pretty much the same here, except for the fact that things are easier to understand in Continia. Well, not for me anyway. I'm still trying to get the hang of this place. She reached up and gave me a light kiss. You will. Rogart looked at us. Save it, you two. We have ground to cover, he said with a smile. Young love. I was too busy looking at Rogart, listening to what he said, to notice the large rock in front of my feet. I went down, falling to my right. When I landed, the only thought that came into my head was the fact that I had put my flower in my right pocket, the one I had just landed on. I stood up as fast as I could and reached into my pocket, expecting to pull out a smashed love-scent flower. Instead, it came out as clean, as perfect as before. Rogart looked at me. You all right there, John? Don't worry about the flower, my friend. As long as Valaris is in perfect health, the flower will also be, no matter what you do to it. They are your token of union. As long as your love-scent is in perfect health, you can rest assured that your mate is good health as well. Now, if it wilts or dies, that is when you should really worry. Oh, okay, thank you, Rogart. Valaris looked at me worried. Are you all right? You took a nasty fall. Oh, I'm fine. I was more worried about the flower than myself. She gave me the most beautiful smile and grabbed my hand as we walked towards the woods that loomed in the distance. It took probably a good half a day's walk until we reached them. The terrain was flat and without much to look at. The ground was covered in long, thick grass with small and large rocks scattered all over. In the far west, I was able to spot large mountains looming, waiting for us. We come up to a very large roaring river flowing with crystal clear water. The only bridge on the west side is farther north. The Great Plains River is very deep and very fast. We would have no chance trying to get across that by swimming. It will only set us back about an hour or two going up to the bridge, Rogart said, staring at the river. Be ready. Bandits and thieves often scout out that bridge. I would like to try out my new sword. If any trouble does occur, I said, fondling the handle of the mighty blade. Rogart laughed. Got the itch, do you now, John? A brisk noon fight always does one good. A little head poked out from the top of Rogart's pack, blinking in the sunlight. That was now reaching high noon. Fight? Where to fight? I beat them all, Verna said, slurring most of the words, while pulling out his staff and gave off a few sparks. Rogart reached behind him and pushed the little pointy-nosed head back into the pack. Ouch, you little bug, Rogart yelled, whipping his hand out of the pack. That little cretin bit me. You deserved it. A little muffled voice came from the pack. Valaris and I had a good laugh as we continued north along the river. Things were peaceful. Plants and bushes alike moved to the symphony of the wind. Animals of all shapes and sizes scrounged for food and water along the edge of the mighty river. At one point, I noticed a rabbit hopping along, and its whiskers and little nose sniffing the ground and nipping away at the tall grass. When the rabbit got too close to a strange patch of grass that was elevated just above the rest, a bright green mouth shot out from under it, snapping the rabbit in half with its tooth-filled jaws, disappearing back underneath the patch with the remains of the rabbit. I made sure to avoid any strange patches of grass from that point on. An hour later, we arrived at the large stone bridge that turned into a wide, not so well-traveled road on the other side of the river bank. The only thing that seemed out of place was a large oak tree on our side of the river next to the bridge. There was no one in sight of the bridge. My heart sank a little when I noticed that the bridge looked like it hadn't been used in quite a while. After all, I was kind of hoping to get a chance to use my new sword in defense of Valaris. Play the hero for once in my life. When we got near the bridge, two figures jumped out of the tree on top of Rogart, yelling. They were both massive men. Just one of them was equal to the size of Rogart. Rogart struggled with them, locked into a wrestling match, when one of the two pulled out a dagger and lifted it, ready to strike a mortal wound. An arrow whizzed past my left ear and struck the man holding the dagger through his wrist, pinning him to the tree behind him. I turned and looked to see who had shot the arrow when I saw Valaris with her bow strung, with another arrow ready to fly. Valaris' eyes focused, her aim on the other man, now backing away from Rogart. Can I have the last one, love? I asked Valaris. As you wish, lover, Valaris said with a smile as she lowered her bow, but did not take the arrow off the string. I noticed Rogart had gotten up and had his sword point touching the pinned man's throat, eager to thrust it through. I walked towards the other man, who was standing with wide eyes staring at Val's bow. As I got close to him, he pulled out his rusty old claymore, ready to fight. I pulled my sword out, in defense, and as soon as I did, the man's eyes grew to twice their original size. He dropped his sword and took off on a run towards Worgen. Rogart took a dagger from his belt and threw the blade as hard as he could. The blade sank deep into the running man's back. The thief was sprawling to the ground. Rogart turned and looked the pinned man in the eyes before thrusting his sword point into his throat. Rogart cleaned his blade on the grass and walked over to the man he had nailed with his dagger. He forcefully removed the dagger from his back and buried his sword in the man's chest, finishing the job. Why did you have to go and kill them? I asked, upset by what I had just witnessed. They had stopped their attack. Yeah, John, they did stop their attack. So you thought anyway. The other was taking off to their hideout to get the rest of their guild. If I didn't finish them off, they would have gotten to the rest of the guild and came after us. It's easier to deal with 2 of them than 20. Besides, theft is punishable by death in Wergen. I'm a lord, ordained to uphold the law of my people, Rogar said, wiping his dagger on the grass. I shrugged. Okay then. Why didn't you just say so from the beginning? I asked with a grin as I sheathed my blade. Very funny. Besides, they would have killed you faster than you could think to get that blade you carry. True. Should have thought of that, I said, rolling my eyes. Just then we heard a moan come from Rogart's pack that was lying on the ground where he had fought the 2 thieves. Rogart's eyes grew wide as he realized what that was and took off on a run towards the pack. When he opened it, he broke out into a hearty laugh. Out crawled a now sober Vertinaris with a light blue glow surrounding him. It's a dang good thing that spell came to mind as soon as I first felt the pressure of your overly large muscle-bound bulk. I could have been crushed, you nitwitted barbarian, Vertinaris said, a little dazed by the day's events. Now I have a headache thanks to that strong ale you kind makes. Not to mention the weight of the 3 apes on top of me. Thank the great one that my father invented the weight shield spell. Calm down, you little piece of worm food. Or I'll introduce you to the war mount and really show you weight, Rogart said, laughing. Vertinaris opted to ride shotgun on my shoulder for a while. I obliged the little rodent as we began our journey to the forest, which was not that far off to the west. We followed the road for at least 2 hours, and we came to the edge of the forest. Rogart turned to me. This is the southern tip of Morganaris Wood. There's a certain place in this wood that I want you to see, John, Rogart said, taking a deep breath. We will stop there for the night. As we entered the woods, a light rain began to fall. I stopped and looked above the tree canopy. Sure enough, light rain clouds were overhead. I just shook my head and continued to follow Rogart into the woods with Vertinaris, holding on to my robe collar, dangling his little feet down my chest. For a little guy, he sure wasn't very light. Just before sunset, we came to a small clearing, and in the center of the clearing was a hill with a single beam of light shining down on it. On top of the hill was a stone statue, almost completely worn down from the rain and weather. The statue, from what I was able to make out, was wearing a robe much like the one I wore now. The statue's head was looking towards the sky, and both arms were raised. Below the feet of the statue was a cave entrance, supported by columns of blue marble. The columns had worn markings of a strange nature. Rogart led us to the entrance of the cave and stopped. You have to go first, John, he said in a low and very serious voice. That is the end of chapter 8. A lot longer than chapter 7. And it's about to get interesting. Stay tuned for chapter 9. I am Joe the Wigit, author and narrator for Emperor of Continia, book 1 of the Draman Saga. You can find it on Amazon, or you can just search The Wigit or Joe the Wigit on Google and you will find the books. Thank you so much for listening, everybody.